Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of PharSide Pholios, part of the PharSide Coed Book Club. We are excited to welcome you to this episode as we have been celebrating amazing April with National Reading Month, Drop Everything and Read Month, and School Library Month with amazing series of author interviews. So we are so excited about what we have for you this afternoon. Our special guest today is Jeff Chapman. Jeff Chapman was born and raised in Kansas in the center of the continental United States, where mowing the lawn means harvesting a whole wheat field. He writes software by day, and when he should be sleeping, he writes speculative fiction, fantasy, horror, ghost stories, anything creepy. A few years ago, Jeff survived a serious illness, which became a powerful kick in the behind to pursue his dreams of writing and publishing. The journey has begun, but it's far from over. There are novels in his head waiting to get out. When he's not writing, he likes to read and spend time with his wife, children, and cats in a house with more books than bookshelf space. Don't I know the story? All right, so welcome to the Far Side, Mr. Jeff Chapman.
Thank you. Thanks for that great intro.
Well, thank you for being here with us. And we are talking about The Snigger's Revenge, a fantasy adventure. And this is, I think, your latest and greatest.
Yes, this is my my fourth novel. Yeah, it's my fourth novel. Here it is.
Okay, you're fourth. All right, so you're getting it in. You're getting it in, Mr. Chapman. Chapter 1 of this book opens with what appears to be a normal activity of, two men playing a game of checkers outside of a community gathering spot. How will this distraction of a woman of interest play out in the rest of the novel?
Well, the woman that walks past is named Arabella, and she's the local squire's daughter. And one of the boys is quite interested in her. And this distracts him from the game, which actually causes him to lose the game, which basically is the catalyst for everything else that happens later. It leads to an argument with his brother on the way home, which leads him to then go into the barrow. His brother challenges him to go into a barrow where he steals something, which then he tries to give to Arabella, which then leads to everything that goes downhill from there, basically.
So, and you speak of a squire, so that makes me think, okay, this has got to be what, medieval time periods, and or what century or time period did you set this in?
Well, it's a fantasy, so it's not in any particular time period, but I was thinking more like the 18th century time period.
Okay. Kings and squires and such.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right. So, you go into chapter. So we fast forward into chapter 2, where you've got these brothers, Ethan and Nate, and you talked about them going into a barrow. And so, what's this backstory of this this creature beyond is the spirit of the king's best warrior cast into a body cobbled by corpses?
Right. So the barrow has a guardian who's supposed to make sure that no items are ever taken from it. And if he does this, then in the afterlife, he will be the king. He'll have the honor of being the king's chief warrior, essentially. So he has a lot of reason not to want anything to be stolen from here. And so he's the guardian of the barrow, and he can shapeshift into a bird-like form, although it's very troublesome to do this, so he doesn't want to do this very often. So when Ethan goes into the barrow, that's how he first encounters him, in this bird-like form.
So, okay. So he counters this in this. I mean, describe this barrow kind of.
It's a mound with built with stone and then earth over the top of it. So it's been there for millennia. So it has grass growing over it, and then there's a stone circle with standing stones that go around it, and then there's a small door going into it.
So without kind of giving the story fully away.
Okay.
Can you provide for those who are watching live and those who catch this episode by replay the premise of the Snigger's Revenge?
Okay, so a young man takes a piece of jewelry from a barrow and tries to give it to a girl that he fancies, and the guardian of the barrow comes after it.
Okay, all right. So it's like that is a cliffhanger right there.
Because you told me not to give it away.
So without giving it away, so it leaves us on the cliff. So you got remember my live viewers and those who will catch it by replay that April is Drop Everything and Read month. So we're gonna drop everything to read, and we're gonna pick up the Snigger's Revenge. Why? Because we need to know about what's in the barrel, what happens as a result of this brother going in. So what brought you into writing, kind of going speculative fiction, going into fantasy versus something like true crime or mystery or sci-fi?
I trained as a historian in addition to a software engineer, so I guess I'm predisposed to look back in time as opposed to sci-fi. You'd be looking forward in time into the future. So I like to look back in time and invent worlds in my imagination and ask, what would happen if such and such happened, and then write the story and go from there.
Now you've written a series of fantasy. You've got the Merle's Tales. You've got novellas, short stories with the comic Cat Tales. A fantasy horror comedy series, The Huckster Tales. A series of anthology, as well as a historical suspense novella. What is the challenge of writing is such a range of fantasy?
I primarily start off with an incident or characters in an incident, a situation, and then let the story go from there. I told you I'm interested in history, so that explains why I think that explains why I've written so much in fantasy, because a lot of them have a historical basis to them. I like to read history and I like to watch a lot of documentaries, so that's where a lot of my ideas come from. And I also really like cats, so the contemporary cat tales are funny stories I've come up with that have cats involved in them.
So how has writing in different forms, from short stories to novels, contributed to your growth and development as a writer?
When I first started out, I was writing short stories that I was trying to sell to magazines. And at that time, I couldn't imagine writing a novel because I couldn't imagine coming up with a story that would be that long. And then when I finally started writing novels, now I'm to the point where I find it really hard to write a short story because I can't imagine a story that'll fit into a form that small. So occasionally I come up with a story that does fit into a short story, and then I just let the story go as far as it goes. But most of the time they extend far beyond the short story into the novella or novel form.
Is there a particular genre that you haven't explored that you may want to explore or jump into in the future?
I have ideas for doing a series of mysteries set in a steampunk world. So that's rattling around in my head now, and I'm thinking about writing something along those lines in the next few years. So I have a character figured out, and then I have a couple ideas for some mysteries.
Well, that is awesome. So from fantasy to steampunk, from short story to novel, have you found, do you feel like you've found your niche in writing, where this is like, this is my lane?
I think I'm pretty much in the novel fantasy kind of lane right now. Yeah, I think that's where I am, and I'm going to continue writing in that lane. So, I mean, fantasy's wide open. Steampunk is part of fantasy, and then the standard types of fantasy with magic and sword and sorcery kind of things. So fantasy is pretty wide open. So you can find something to write about without stepping on anyone else's toes.
So with this particular book about the Sniggers Tale, do you see it as a standalone, or do you think there's something in the story that could be further developed for it to be a second or a third in a series?
When I first wrote it, I thought it would be a standalone. Then I got to the end of the story, or at least the end of this particular story arc, and there are questions left over. So I can definitely see myself writing a sequel to this, and I plan to. Whether there'll be a third, I don't know. It'll depend on where I am when I get to the end of the next one. But it's possible. It could be a series.
So can you tell us something about, your writing journey? I mean, from being a software engineer to this other part of your life that has fantasy, that has short stories, that has novellas, that has, the whole mix of horror and fantasy and humor, as well. I mean, that includes, anthologies. So, give us some shed some light on your story as a writer. How you started and now where you are now.
Okay. Like I told you before, I started off writing short stories for magazines. I really didn't like going through the process of writing stories and then sending them off. Then you get various rejection letters, and then you have to keep sending them off. And then eventually you find acceptance, which is really thrilling when you get that acceptance that one day. And I realized at some point that most of the serious writers, and of course, if you want to make any money doing this, you need to write novels, because that's mostly what people read. It's hard to find people that like to read a lot of short stories. Even established authors have trouble selling anthologies of short stories. So the real interest is in the novels. And so I had to push myself to try to write a novel, and eventually I managed to churn out a story that was novel length, and then I've gone on from there.
So we've got short stories, we've got novels, we've got articles that have been published. You've got articles that have been published in your arsenal, of, to your credit, of writing. What is something that you've learned about yourself through that process of writing, especially the part about getting those rejection letters? How is that, how did you deal with that at the time? because we do have those who are
Mm-hmm.
who are aspiring writers, and so I think that's something that you have to be able to face, and you might be challenged with. So, what's something that you kind of learned about yourself as a writer, and dealing with things like that?
I think the most important lesson is don't give up. Keep pushing forward, keep pushing through any failures, because you're going to learn from writing any story you write. You just have to keep pushing forward. The only failed writer is one who stops writing. So if you keep going, you're not a failure. And that success is, you're going to find your audience. Sometime you're going to find your niche. You're going to find success. Just keep going.
So, I mean, with that process, did you, with your writing process, did you find a difference between, what was the big difference between, writing for magazines, versus, kind of publishing those short stories and novels?
When I started writing the novels for myself, I felt like there was a lot more freedom, because I could just let the story go wherever I wanted to. I wasn't trying to fit what a magazine was interested in, what kind of story they were interested in publishing. I could just, let the story flow and let my imagination go wherever it wanted to go.
So what are some, okay, so you've got, like I said before, you've got the huckster tales, you got the comic cat tales, you got the Marilys Chronicles. And so you've got these wonderful stories and series that you've published, and the the Sniggards Revenge is going to be, another great series or a sequel, a book that will have a sequel, a possible sequel.
Right.
What are some other themes or topics that you're interested in exploring? Even within the context of fantasy writing.
One thing I'm interested in with fantasy, a lot of fantasies typically are written from the top down. Like they'll focus on kings and queens and the actions of people at the top. A lot of my fantasies, I focus on characters that aren't at the top of the social scale. So I want to look at how people lower down in the social scale deal with major events and write it from their perspective.
And I think that, that gives you, another kind of a look up,
Right.
and a look up from where, a peasant or a serf or, someone who could only aspire to, like your character in this book, who aspires to be in a relationship with the beautiful Annabelle, who may be out of his league,
right,
so to speak. So from that perspective, you definitely have opportunity to explore the economics, the community, where did they, how did they grow up? How did they live? So it just opens up, further broadens the world, I think, that you're able to create.
And for instance, the Merlis tales, the protagonist in there is a woman's spirit who's been banished to the body of a cat. So in this case, we have, I call it fantasy from a cat's eye view.
So, I loved when I went to your website and saw that. I'm like, okay, this is going to be real interesting. This is going to be real interesting. So I'm just like, okay. I was like, after I finish this one, then I'm going to go back and pick up the other one. So remember, all of our live and replay viewers, we're definitely going to follow Jeff Chapman on his social media and his website, so that we can not only drop everything and read and pick up the story about the Sniggard, but we're going to tap in to the Marilyn's Tales and all some of the other wonderful things he offers. So speaking of your website, you've got a like a group or like a reading group or
I have a mailing list.
Okay. So, tell our viewers about, what you do through your mailing list.
So you can sign up for the mailing list, and there are 2 free short stories you can get from doing that. One's a fairy tale, and the other is a story in my Huckster Tale series. And then I put out a letter about an email about once a month saying, what I'm doing, letting you know if there are any sales going on, new releases. And then I also let you know about books from other fantasy authors that you might be interested in that are on sale or free at the time. So I don't bug you too much. Just I'm not going to fill up your email box.
All right. Awesome. That's awesome. That's a wonderful thing to know. But it's also a good thing to know what, our authors are doing or have going on. And you also, I think, write a blog. Can you talk about that?
I haven't been blogging very much. I used to write a blog about curious word histories.
Mm-hmm.
So I look at words that have multiple meanings. They're spelled the same, but they mean completely different things depending on the context. So I find word histories interesting. I was doing that for a while, but I haven't been doing that for a long time now. But a lot of those entries are still up there if you're interested in looking at those.
Awesome.
I've been focusing on the writing, on the fiction writing is what I've been focusing on.
Well, we are glad that you've kept your focus on the fiction because it gives us more to look forward. Definitely more for us to look forward to. What is something that you think readers will take away or you want readers to take away from the Sniggard's Revenge?
Well, the obvious thing is don't steal jewelry from a barrow because, somebody might come after you and bad things are going to happen. The other thing is be conscious of other people's agendas. That's something that Ethan's going to find out, that a lot of people that help him have their own agendas going on, and they may not be helping him just to help him. And the other is the importance of family. I think Ethan comes to appreciate his family a lot more at the end of this novel.
And you see that at the beginning, that whole, I really don't feel like being a big brother. This, my brother gets on my, nerves. And then the whole, got something to prove, I'm not afraid type thing. I'm going to show my, I was like, to the risk of his own safety, but I'm going to show my brother and all his little friends that I'm not a coward. And so he finds himself in a situation, even though, he can hear, what his mom or his, parents might do, if he doesn't get home on time.
Right.
So definitely the importance of, family or how the perspective of family is there at the beginning. And as, you develop it throughout the course, of the story. And, we learn more about, all of the interplay between all of the characters through the story. So as someone who has, written for magazines, who's done the short stories, who's produced anthologies, who's produced novels, what are some, I guess, words of wisdom for aspiring writers, whether they just have a concept or idea or just start, even if they're just starting the writing process?
Well, like I said before, don't give up. Don't become discouraged. It's not an easy road writing. It takes a lot out of you. You have to you have to be very diligent about it and work at it every day, like any other talent you're trying to develop. I would encourage people to, read books that other writers have written about how they write.
Mm-hmm.
Try to soak up as much knowledge about the craft as you can, and then keep at it. If this is your dream, then keep at it.
So, encouragement from to our aspiring writers and those who are thinking about writing or have a story in their head just to keep writing. One of the things about that process is you've got all of these different pieces. You've got editing, you've got, different, parts of editing, whether it's line, whether it's copy, whether it's, content or developmental. Um, how did you, I guess, approach, you know, I guess identifying the publisher that was going to that you were going to trust with your work, with your story?
I published some novellas with a small press, and I really enjoyed working with the editor that they gave me.
Mm-hmm.
So when I started to publish my novels independently, I asked her if she would, if I could contract with her to edit my work, and she said yes. And so I've been using her for the past few novels. So when I finish a draft and I've read through it and I've fixed all the inconsistencies and any problems that I can find, I send it off to her, and she does an edit, sends them back to me, and I, put in the edits that she suggested.
And so, how has that, I think a lot of, new writers, every people aspire to the huge, huge publishing houses like a Simon and Schuster, um, like a random house. What are some of the benefits of of being an independent author?
The main benefit is that you, at the end of the day, you still own everything. And I still own all the rights to my novels. Um, I get to pick who I want my editor to be. Um, I have total control over the cover, so I don't have somebody imposing a cover on me that I wouldn't like at all. And so you do have to shoulder the costs, but then you can keep all the profits from the book. And most important is you own the book. It's not, you're not selling it to the company, which will then own it for however many decades.
And that's huge because you think about, being able to leave legacy,
Mm-hmm.
for your children and, your
Right.
children's children. And, if you've got a big machine, there's no necessarily guarantee that you'll have that, kind of footing, or
Mm-hmm.
stability where, you know, the money outlives you,
Right.
after you're gone, that, well, somebody's profiting off of your book after you're gone, and versus, being independent and being able to, even your grandkids can, sell grandpa's book and say, my
Mm-hmm.
grandpa wants his book
Exactly.
in, and we're going, we can still, share the work and benefit um, from the work. So thank you for, pointing that out, because
Mm-hmm.
I don't think a lot of people really think about that aspect of, of independence.
And another thing is when you sell a book to a publishing house, they don't necessarily put in a huge marketing effort behind you. A lot of times they'll put the book out and see how it goes.
Mm-hmm.
And then if it does well, they'll put more money into it. And if it, just does okay, they might not put much money into selling it at all.
Mm.
And they kind of just let it float there. And then if it doesn't do well, you're going to find it hard to sell another book to them.
Mm. Yeah, so these are definitely some wisdom nuggets for those who are aspiring to write and are thinking about that, taking the leap and dive into that journey. So thank you for those just helpful nuggets. Can you tell us how viewers can um, follow you and purchase your books and all of that wonderful stuff?
Well, The Sniggers Revenge is available on Amazon. It's also in Kindle Unlimited. So if you're in that program, you can read it for free. A lot of all my other books are for sale on Amazon. Some are available on other sites like Kobo, for instance. You can follow me on my website at jeffchapmanbooks.com. And you can find me on Facebook at Jeff Chapman Writer. I have a Facebook page. And you can find me on Goodreads. So just look up Jeff Chapman on Goodreads. You should be able to find me.
Well, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Chapman, for just spending this time with us this afternoon. And we definitely wish you continued success with the Sniggers Revenge, a fantasy adventure, as well as all of the other works that you have out there on Amazon and all of those wonderful book retailers where people can purchase their books online or even in stores. So definitely thank you for sharing this time with us this afternoon. And for those who are watching us live and those who will watch the replay, we want you to make sure that you're staying tuned to the PharSide Coed Book Club Facebook page for more author interviews and posts. Thank you for joining us this month of April as we've celebrated National Poetry Month, School Library Month, and Drop Everything and Read Month. So as you're dropping everything and reading today and as we go into May, continue to read across the genres and pick up this wonderful book by Jeff Chapman, The Sniggers Revenge. You definitely want to pick this up. You will not be disappointed. So for my audience watching live and replay, until next time, many roots, many voices are a part of the infinite story. So plant your seed. Have a great and wonderful afternoon.